الله أكبر الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله الله تعالى بالهدى ودين الحق فبلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح الأمة وجاهد في الله حق جهاده وترك أمته على محجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيد عنها إلا هالك وصلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. أما بعد. Brothers and sisters, there was a man one time that he had a certain neighbor, and he would basically share a wall with his neighbor, and this man himself was a very pious individual, and he would spend his nights praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He would pray, he would spend his nights in tahajjud, he would be focusing and calling out to Allah in these blessed hours. And his neighbor would spend the entire night partying it up. And so he would have, sometimes the neighbor would have people over, and sometimes, throughout the entire night he would sing and just be in a state of just heedlessness. And he would be singing throughout the night in a very sad, depressed way. Oh my Lord, the people have left me. nobody cares about me. Everyone has just cast me aside. And he would sing this night after night. Now you can imagine his neighbor, how upset he must have gotten. He's up at night praying to Allah, and this man, he's up just spending the entire night singing away. But you see, one night, something happened. As this man came to pray his tahajjud, he's praying and he realizes it's pin drop silence. There's no sound from his neighbor. And so he starts to inquire with some of the other people, and they say, yeah, that man, he got arrested last night. And so this man, this pious man, he had some connections with the government, and he knew the governor and things like that, and some way he got to the prison and got this man released. And as they were both walking home together, the man who was in prison, the man who would spend the entire night singing away, he was very thankful. He said to him, Jazakallah khair, may Allah reward you, thank you so much, you did all of this and that. And as they were walking back, they stopped. And this pious man, he asked this individual, he said, I want you to tell me one thing. Was I amongst the people who abandoned you? And this man said, no, by Allah, you were amongst those people. You were not amongst those people who abandoned you. And I know that for sure now. Now this man, the pious man, he was you may have heard of him. He was the great Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah. And his neighbor, after this point, went on to become one of his students and a scholar in his own right. Now the question arises, why? Because you see, Imam Abu Hanifa, he actually had a certain quality. And that quality was that he cared about the person. Even though he may have been disturbed all night long, but he had compassion. And when you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, one of the hallmarks, one of the defining qualities of the Prophet ﷺ was compassion. Think about, the very famous story. After the Prophet ﷺ gets the first revelation, and we all know this, we learned this in school. He gets the first revelation. Jibreel alayhi salam comes, squeezes him tightly, tells him, Iqra, and he says, Ma'ana biqari, ila al-akhri. He goes all the way, he runs back home. He's nervous. He doesn't know what to make of it, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He goes to Khadija radiallahu anha. We all know the story. And then he says, Zambiluni, cover me. And then what does Khadija tell him? What's really fascinating about this? Is when you really ponder upon this, it's amazing. Because she is there, and she gives him a certain argument as to why that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not lead him astray. What was the foundation of her argument? The foundation of her argument? Allah would never do that to you. Why? Because you give to the poor, you help the orphans, and you free the slaves, and so on and so forth. What was her main reason for convincing the Prophet that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not do that he is indeed the messenger of Allah, so on? What was the main reason? It was this idea of his core, and that was compassion. Compassion. And today, what I wanted to speak to you about were two elements within this idea of compassion. One thing that we think about when we think about compassion, we think about how we are compassionate to others. And sometimes we forget that while we're reflecting upon our generosity or whatever it might be, sometimes we tend to forget, what about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's generosity to us? Because in reality, many of us forget that. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, he's asking the human being, Ya ayyuhal insan, ma gharraka bi rabbikal kareem. Oh human being, what has caused you to be deluded about your generous Lord? Your Lord who is generous, Allah who is generous. I remember a certain speaker, he mentioned something. He said that he had gone to Medina at one point and he had gotten very, very sick. And he says that this sickness, he had like a sore throat, chest issues. And he said, I was in this state for like 3 or 4 weeks, maybe even a month or so. And he said, I would go doctor to doctor. And every doctor would give me some sort of medicine, and it wasn't working. He said and then I remember that I made a certain dua to Allah. Now he's in the city of Medina, and he's making a dua. He says, Oh Allah, that I am here as your guest. And I know that you are generous because people are generous to their guests, and there's no one more generous than you. You're the one that cures, so Allah cure me of this ailment. He says, when I finished the dua, he said, I got a phone call. A friend of mine said, look, I know a doctor, and I think you should go see him. So he says, I went to the doctor, and this doctor, he was very different than the other doctors. I came in, first thing he says to me, he says, okay, all right, you look good. And he starts checking like all of my vitals and all of these things. And he says, every time he would say, heart, good, mashallah. Lungs, mashallah, good. He says, brain, good, mashallah. Okay, circulation, good, mashallah. And he says he kept on saying this. I mean, he was reinforcing it to such an extent. He goes, man, when I left that, I felt great. When I went to doctors beforehand, they would tell me all the things wrong with me. I walked into those doctors and walked out feeling even more miserable. He goes, when I walked out of his office, when he said, mashallah, everything's good, he's like, yeah, everything's good. He walked out, he felt great. He said, what that doctor had done, he had flipped the script in a sense. Because he had reminded me, instead of focusing on that one particular ailment, he started for me to reflect upon all of the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given me that I wasn't even thinking about. And how many of us, we spend our days and our nights completely negligent of the blessings of Allah. I want you to think about that for a second. Your eyes that blink throughout the day so that your eyes can have moisture in them. You don't think about that much. The circulation of the blood throughout your entire body. The fact that your heart is pumping day in and day out without your volition. That if the blood flow was cut off to the brain, you would die. Your lungs that are taking in oxygen and basically purifying your cells, and then taking the waste from your cells and then excluding that. All of those things, those are blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya ayyuhal insan, ma gharraka bi rabbikal kareem. Oh human being, what has caused you to be deluded about your generous Lord? It's something we don't think about. Think about something like your molar teeth. Your molar teeth, the thing that you masticate with, right? Like if you didn't have certain types of teeth, your molar teeth, you wouldn't be able to eat meat. But the only time you and I think about it is when you get a toothache, right? And then you realize, oh yeah, these teeth, like they really hurt. But what about the years that you spent using those teeth? And so at this time, subhanAllah, when you think about it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is extremely generous. And one of the best aspects of generosity is the fact that He does not make days to be the same. I want you to think about this. This is maybe a slightly deeper point, but you seem like an educated lot, and I think that, looks like we have doctors and so on and so forth in the audience. I want you to think about this for a second. The day of Jum'ah is not like the rest of the week. There are more blessings on the day of Jum'ah, right? There are more blessings in the last 10 nights of Ramadan than the rest of the year. There's more blessings in certain places that you go to. If you're in Mecca or Medina, they're more blessed than Tyler, Texas, right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows the human being. Allah ya'lamu man khalaq. Does He not know what He created? He knows that if all the days were the same, you would have no incentive to do more, to come closer to Allah, to exert yourself. Similarly, like if everyone had the same amount of money, how could you possibly show generosity? Just like that, if the days were exactly the same in terms of their blessing, what sort of motivation would that be? Now the reality is that right now we are in the first 10 days of the Hijjah. And these are the best days of the year. Now you might be thinking, hold on, what about the last 10 nights of Ramadan? Yes, those are the best nights of the year. But the best days of the year are in fact what we're going through right now, this time of the first 10 days of the Hijjah. I'm sure you're very familiar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He mentions and He swears in the Quran, when He takes an oath, and in the very famous, I'm sure, oft recited, Surah Al-Fajr, wal-Fajr, wal-Layalin Ashr, wal-Shafri wal-Watr, right? By the early dawn, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and by the 10 nights. Allah is swearing by the greatness of these 10 days, these first 10 days of the Hijjah, right? By the odd and by the even. Now, I want you to just kind of take a trip with me and take this journey with me about understanding what is the aspect of these very 10 days that we're in. And we're in them right now. So, when looking at the tafsir of this, Ibn Kathir mentions, he says, look, when you're looking at the time of Fajr, he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compared to Fajr, that there are two ends of the day mentioned. Now, he says that he narrates a hadith from Abdullah ibn Umar, radiallahu anhu. Abdullah ibn Umar he says that there are no days. Listen to this. This is not a statement from me, not a statement from Sheikh so-and-so. This is a statement from a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And the Prophet told us, خير الناس قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. The best generation is my generation, then the one after that, then the one after that. Coming from the best generation. So what does Abdullah ibn Umar say about these 10 days? He says, there are no days that are greater before Allah in which good deeds are more beloved to Him than these 10 days. So recite a lot of tahmid, tasbih, takbir, and so on and so forth. If you're looking for a time period in which you want to now struggle and do good deeds, this is the time to now do it. This is the time. But if that's not enough motivation, let me throw in one more. So, Anas ibn Malik, radiallahu anhu, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I want you to listen to this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made every single one of these 10 days equal to 1,000 years. Every day, every deed that you do, Anas ibn Malik is saying, the deed that you do on this day, it's like you did it for 1,000 years. Any sort of takbir that you did, Allahu Akbar. This is the time when we proclaim. Some people think it's only on Eid and the 3 days, and the 2 or 3 days afterwards that you're supposed to say Allahu Akbar. But these are the days to say it. Some of the Sahaba, they would go to the marketplaces, nice and loud. Now, I'm not saying that you do that here, come on, to go to like Kroger or whatever. But you get my point, is that at least when you come into the masjid, this is the time. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, wa lillahi alhamd. This is the time to do it. And the thing is, why? Because of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Because of the generosity of your Lord. Because of all of the blessings that He gave you. And when you start to reflect upon it, it's like you'll never be able to enumerate all those blessings. إِن تُعَدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you try to enumerate the blessings, you wouldn't be able to do it. Think about it. The blessings of your health, the blessings of your community, the blessings of your fellow Muslims, the blessings of your spouse, of your children. I mean, how many blessings? Your education, your background, your position, where you are, your jobs, your place, all of that. And if you start to enumerate that, try to make a mental list and say, based on that list, how much have I given back? So remember, I started off by saying that there were a couple of aspects I wanted to speak about, and a couple of deeds that you can do in these 10 days that are of maximal benefit. And inshallah, I'll speak about these deeds. I'm going to give you 2 or 3, and that way I want to give you like an exhaustive, 25-item list. But inshallah, if you focus on these 2 or 3, that this is the time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed these 10 days. These are the best days of the year. And this is the time to really reflect upon who Allah is, and more importantly, where is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your own life? أقول قولي هذا واستغفر. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. So brothers and sisters, one deed that we kind of alluded to earlier was this idea of proclaiming the greatness of Allah, saying your takbir, Allahu Akbar, saying your tasbih, saying your tahmid, like all these, like alhamdulillah, subhanallah, la ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar. The thing is, what I'd like us to reflect upon is not that we're saying just empty words, but that these words have meanings. When you say Allahu Akbar, what does that even mean? Linguistically, Allahu Akbar is actually, it's what's known as the comparative as to the superlative when you look at like English grammar. In other words, you're saying Allah is not necessarily the greatest, but you're saying He's greater than something. But because there's nothing greater than Allah, it's usually translated as Allahu Akbar, like He's the greatest. But as you're saying this, you might want to fill in the blank. There's a little bit of ellipsis here in the sentence. Allahu Akbar. Allah is greater than what? Allah is greater than my wealth. Allah is greater than my life. Allah is greater than my family. Allah is greater. And you keep on going. Every time you mention Allahu Akbar, right? That's what we mean by proclaiming the greatness of Allah. Now, I mentioned this idea. These are words. Words have meanings. But let me take it on a second good deed. And that is the impact that words have on other people. And these words that we think about, when we say, sometimes we don't realize the impact it has on people. You would say something very quickly to someone, you might not think anything of it, that you don't know what sort of impact those words have on another person's life. I remember one time there was a man, he said, I used to play basketball in one of these gymnasiums. He said, when I was younger. And we used to have a man that would come in, and he was very quiet, and he wouldn't really talk to anyone.